Well, good afternoon, English 10 Honors. It's me. I'm back again to talk to you about Ethan Frome, Chapter 9. So, we are nearing the end of this classic American novel. I hope you've enjoyed it. I love it. It's one of my favorites, and I hope you've liked it too. It's definitely different than the things we have been reading so far this year, and it's definitely different than the things you might choose to read on your own, which I think is a good thing. So, in chapter 9, we have Maddie's last day at the Frome farm, right? So, Xena is pretty cold toward her. She says, "Go up and get your trunk." And we know that Maddie couldn't carry it down by herself, even if she had wanted to. And so Ethan goes up there and she's crying in the bedroom. And so he kind of comforts her for a minute. And then he, of course, carries the trunk down on his shoulder because, he's a big, strong man. Okay? So, anyway, later on in the afternoon is when the time comes for them to go to the train. The train's going to pick Maddie up not pick Maddie up. Maddie's going to catch the train at 5. And so Ethan says, "We'll be ready at 3. And so she is. And so instead of driving straight to town and hanging out for a couple of hours at the train station, Ethan drives out to someplace called Shadow Pond. Okay, so we find a little bit in the kind of backstory, a little bit more about their relationship and how they first started, I guess, to be interested in each other. And it was a church picnic, and Maddie had asked Ethan to go, and he had refused. But then he happened to be driving by on his way home from work. He was, sawing down trees or something, and he got kind of pulled into the party. And then at the party, he sat down with Maddie for a few minutes, drank some coffee, and then she realized that she had lost a locket. Okay, so she asked people to help her look for it, and Ethan was the one who found it. So it says, he remembers, he says, "It was right there I found your locket," he said. This is on page 66 in the skinny book, pushing his foot into a dense tuft of blueberry bushes. "I never saw anybody with such sharp eyes," she answered. Okay, so anyway, so they chit-chat for a couple seconds, and it says that Ethan for a moment had the illusion that he was a free man, wooing the girl he meant to marry. He looked at her hair and longed to touch it again and to tell her that it smelt of the woods, but he had never learned to say such things. So, and we know all that, right? We know that Ethan can't express himself. He really doesn't have anything to say, even when he has a chance. So, anyway, they kind of, the moment kind of ends kind of on a strange note, and so they drive off, and this time they're heading back toward town. But Maddie tells him that she first decided that she kind of liked him back then, and that she kind of would think about him sometimes and wonder what it would be like to be married to Ethan instead of having her cousin Xena be married to Ethan. So they're talking about the practicalities of what's going to happen. She says, "You got to write to me." And he says, "Oh, what good will writing do? I want to put my hand out and touch you. I want to care for you, do for you. I want to be there when you're sick and when you're lonesome." And then she says, he says, "Well, I'm sure you're going to get married." And she says, "Oh, Ethan." And he says, "Oh, I don't know how it is you make me feel, Matt. I'd almost rather have you dead than that." "I wish I was. I wish I was," she sobbed. Well, I don't know that we should wish ourselves dead. But anyway, they decide they probably shouldn't. Okay, so they're going to kind of table that thought, move on. So they drive over to probably near the church, because this setting was mentioned in the very first chapter, in chapter 1. And there's this long hill that starts at the road, and people would sled ride down it. So it sounds like it goes like down and then levels off and then down again, and it's really long. By this time, though, it's getting close to evening, okay? And it says it's twilight. Um, Now, it says, well, actually, it doesn't say twilight. I say twilight, but I can tell you where I got that. It says, nevertheless, well, I'll start at the chapter. It says, he laughed contemptuously. I could go down this coast with my eyes tied. And she laughed with him, as if she liked his audacity. Nevertheless, he sat still a moment, straining his eyes down the long hill, for it was the most confusing hour of the evening, the hour when the last clearness from the upper sky is merged with the rising night in a blur that disguises landmarks and falsifies distances. So I know a lot of you have your license or your permit, and I'm sure you know by now from practicing that twilight is the most difficult time to see to drive. Okay, because everything seems to get strange. Everything kind of gets flat. It's the light, that light is playing tricks on our eyes at twilight time. And what they're gonna do, they take a sled that's hanging out under a tree, and they are going to they just sled ride. So they start at the top of the hill and they sled ride down, and it is great. They have the best time. And then at the bottom of the hill, they just get off and they start walking right back up. And he says to her, were you scared I'd run you into the elm? And she says, I told you I never was scared with you. And so they just, they're happy. They're just really happy for a few moments. And then at the top of the hill, they're putting the sled away. And Maddie, reaches out for Ethan and kisses him. And he is like shocked, okay? She says, goodbye, goodbye, and kisses him again. And then he says, I can't let you go. And she says, I can't go either. Matt, what will we do? What will we do? They clung to each other's hands like children, and her body shook with desperate sobs. So then they say, well, okay, it's time to go. The clock's ringing. It's 5 o'clock, and the train's going to come. So she's got to get out. And then she says to him, Ethan, I want you to take me down again. Down where? The coast. Right off, she panted, so that we'll never come up anymore. Matt, what do you mean? She put her lips close against his ear to say, right into the big elm. You said you could, so that we'd never have to leave each other anymore. What are you talking about? You're crazy. I'm not crazy, but I will be if I leave you. Oh, Matt, he groaned. She tightened her fierce hold about his neck. I mean, come on. So, he agrees to do this suicide plan that they have. So they're gonna just slide right down the hill, hit the oak, and then the elm, then they'll be dead. Then they won't have to leave each other. Sounds like a good idea, right? So I want you to notice this one line. It's on page 71. It says, her somber violence constrained him. Because he's still not completely sure this is the right thing to do. She seemed the embodied instrument of fate. That's the line. Okay, so I want you to think about that one. The embodied instrument of fate. Then they have this section where they switch places. In order to steer on one of these sleds, you would sit in the back. And so he's not going to steer. He's just going to try to throw his weight side to side and like stay in the tracks that are already there on the hill. And so they do. And he's leaning for it, right? They hop off, they're down, they're going down, and it says, the big elm shot up ahead, lying in wait for them at the bend in the road, and he said between his teeth, we can fetch it, I know we can fetch it. But then, all of a sudden, his wife's face, with twisted, monstrous lineaments, thrust itself between him and his goal, and he made an instinctive movement to brush it aside. The sled swerved in response, but he righted it again, kept it straight, and drove it down on the black projecting mass. There was a last instant when the air shot past him like millions of fiery wires, and then the elm. The sky was still thick, but looking straight up he saw a single star, and tried vaguely to reckon whether it was serious or the effort tired him, and he closed his heavy lids and thought he would sleep. So that is the crash, right? So the crash has happened, and he doesn't know for several minutes what happened. And then he hears this animal right next to him, a small, frightened sheep like a field mouse. And he's trying to figure out what it is. He reaches out one hand and he touches something soft and springy. It says the thought of the animal's suffering was intolerable to him, and he struggled to raise himself and could not because a rock or some huge mass seemed to be lying on him. But he continued to finger about cautiously with his left hand, thinking he might get a hold of the little creature and help it. And all at once he knew that the soft thing he had touched was Maddie's hair, and that his hand was on her face. He dragged himself to his knees. The monster slowed on him, moving with him as he moved, and his hand went over and over her face, and he felt that the twittering came from her lips. He got down close to hers with his ear to his mouth, and in the darkness he saw her eyes open and heard her say his name. "Oh, Matt, I thought we'd fetched it," he moaned, and far off up the hill he heard the sorrel whinny and thought, "I ought to be getting him his feed." So now we know the truth about Ethan Frome, right? We know what happened to cause him to have that disfigurement, the weird gait that he has, the stooping kind of forward motion. And we know they both survive, right? Or do we? She's alive right there, yeah? What's gonna happen? There's one more thing I wanted to mention before we leave chapter 9. And it's an acronym to help you think about Ethan Frome's decision-making skills. The acronym is the word HALT, H-A-L-T. And the message is that when you are too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you shouldn't be making big decisions, because you're going to make the decision based on those feelings that you have, or the physicalness of those situations. Being hungry, being angry, being lonely, or being tired. So I think that Ethan was dealing with a couple of those, and you can think about that too if you want to. But that's just my tip for your life, okay? I'm not just teaching English, I'm teaching life.